In 1791, George Washington chose the site. 100 square miles of land ceded by Maryland and Virginia along the banks of the Potomac River. Called Federal City, it was to be the new nation's capital. Though the land he selected was largely unsettled and in many ways inhospitable, he and others dreamed of a grand city that would be home to the government of a great nation. One who shared that dream was the person chosen to design the capital, Pierre L'Enfant, a designer and French veteran of the Revolutionary War. He envisioned a ceremonial city of broad boulevards more than 100 feet wide, fountains, and statuaries. But L'Enfant was fired after only a year of work, and for decades the city remained an unrealized dream. In its early years, in fact, the capital was barely a city at all. Abigail Adams, wife of the second president, John Adams, wrote that Washington was a city only so in name. Conditions were so harsh that early diplomats considered it a tropical outpost and received hardship pay. Presidents and their families took to the city's high ground every summer to avoid what they believed were malaria-causing vapors coming off the Potomac, and European visitors ridiculed the city as rough, uncivilized, and underpopulated. Today, the grand ambitions of our nation's early visionaries have been realized, with some modifications. Federal City became Washington in 1799 following the death of our first president. The city, which for decades lacked residents, is now home to a large population as diverse as any in the world. Though L'Enfant's influence was obscured as others designed and built after his departure, the effects of his early design are to this day still evident. The broad open mall he conceived of as the link between what was first called the Presidential Palace and the offices of Congress has been realized in a manner of which he would no doubt approve. Museums and stately government office buildings surround the mall, a broad open space lined by trees and dotted with many of our nation's greatest landmarks. For after many decades, our capital has become the ceremonial city our early leaders dreamed of, a seat of power which is frequently host to world leaders, a city of influence, history, and beauty, and perhaps most of all, a city of monuments. Towering above all of the Capitol is the Washington Monument. At just over 555 feet tall, it was the world's tallest edifice when it was completed, and is still Washington's tallest. Though the monument looks impressive today, for decades it was not. In fact, more than 100 years passed between its authorization by the Continental Congress and its completion in 1888. Early delays were caused by a lack of funding and disputes concerning its design, which at one point included a flourished temple at the base. The result of the longest delay is still perceptible in the monument itself in the change in the color of the stone that occurs around 150 feet up the structure. In 1854, a controversy arose when Pope Pius IX donated a stone to be included in the edifice. The anti-papist Know-Nothing Party was infuriated. A group of masked men stole the stone and disrupted donations, causing a construction delay that was prolonged by the Civil War. For more than 2 decades, the monument stood partially completed. Congress finally approved money for its completion in 1876 and turned the project over to the Army Corps of Engineers. The change in color in the monument is due to the fact that the later stone was taken from a deeper stratum of the same Maryland quarry. The Lincoln Memorial lies west of the Washington Monument, just across the reflecting pool. It is perhaps Washington's most revered memorial. Its design and execution widely regarded as a powerful and near-perfect tribute to the legendary Lincoln. Here, a building designed by Henry Bacon houses a sculpted statue of a sitting Lincoln staring out toward the Washington Monument and the Capitol 2 miles away. "36 Doric columns support a Roman-style roof. Above them are friezes with the names and admission dates of the 36 states that were members of the Union at the time of Lincoln's death, although the date for Ohio is incorrect by 1 year. The sculpture was designed by Daniel Chester French and is often called the Brooding Lincoln. The statue measures 19 feet from heel to head, and it is often said that if Lincoln were to stand, he would be 28 feet tall. On either side of Lincoln, interior columns provide additional support for the roof. Behind them, the north and south walls have murals 12 feet high and 600 feet long, painted by Jules Guérin. The mural on the north wall takes unity as its theme, while the mural on the south wall depicts emancipation. Below it, the text of Lincoln's short and powerful Gettysburg Address is inscribed. Near the Lincoln Memorial is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, a powerful experience for many visitors to the landmarks of Washington. An unusual tribute, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is the newest of the mall's memorials. Unlike other monuments which rise out of the ground, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial recedes into it, its 2 black granite walls cutting down into the earth. The walls are almost 250 feet long. In a symbolic embrace of the past, they are placed so that one reaches out to the Washington Monument and the other to the Lincoln Memorial. The black granite walls are grit-blasted with the names of more than 58,000 Americans killed or unaccounted for in Vietnam. The names are inscribed in chronological order of deaths, the first appearing on the east wall just below 1959, the year of the first American casualty in Vietnam. They descend down the column and then shift to the top of the adjacent tablet, descend down again, and so on out to the narrow end of the wall. The names begin again at the narrow end of the west wall, descending down adjacent tablets until they reach the center of the monument. Here, the names end at the date 1975, adjacent to the tablet where the pattern began. The memorial also includes a bronze of 3 servicemen standing nearby, their contemplative gazes cast toward the dark walls. Together, the 2 works now comprise the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, perhaps Washington's most moving monument. The last of the mall's great presidential monuments is the Jefferson Memorial, which was dedicated in 1943. Its white domed colonnaded building rests on the south bank of the tidal basin, a dramatic sight when Washington's famous cherry trees blossom, usually around early April. The building, designed by John Russell Pope, recalls Jefferson's own Palladian design for his domed home at Monticello, and for the rotunda of the University of Virginia, making the memorial a fitting tribute to Jefferson the architect as well as Jefferson the statesman. 54 Ionic columns support the dome. A classical portico marks the front entrance of the memorial and faces toward the mall over the tidal basin. Inside, a statue of Jefferson 19 feet tall stands in the airy chamber, which has 3 additional entrances. The statue rests on a 6-foot pedestal of Minnesota granite and portrays Jefferson, who was more than 6 feet tall in real life, addressing the Continental Congress. Although the Jefferson Memorial is one of the most popular in Washington, it is perhaps least favored by critics. Some are displeased by the building itself, and many dislike the bronze of Jefferson, a design by Rudolph Evans selected over numerous other submissions. One architectural historian perhaps best put it in his complaint that the statue fails to leave an after image. None complain, on the other hand, about the inscriptions seen on the interior walls of the memorial. They are taken from Jefferson's writings and suggest the extraordinary intellect and wisdom of the man who may well have been the most intelligent and knowledgeable person ever to be president. Just across the Potomac River from the mall is Arlington National Cemetery, our national burial ground. Here lie the graves of famous former servicemen, such as John Pershing, astronauts Roger Chaffee and Virgil Grissom, and boxer Joe Louis, along with the graves of thousands of less famous servicemen who died in conflicts ranging from the Revolutionary War through Vietnam. Among others, Pierre L'Enfant is buried here, his grave overlooking Washington from below the Custis Lee Mansion, which is visible from Washington. This house was built by George Washington Parke Custis, the adopted son of George Washington, and was later home to his daughter and her husband, Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee, and their 7 children. Also here is the grave of President John F. Kennedy, the site continually illuminated by the eternal flame. But Arlington Cemetery is best known as the home of the Tomb of the Unknowns, a crypt cut from a single piece of white granite. Here, the old guard of the 3rd U.S. Infantry at all times attends the remains of 4 unidentified soldiers from the First and Second World Wars, the Korean conflict, and the Vietnam War. This regular changing of the guard occurs with such precision that it has almost become a part of the memorial itself. And it is a dramatic tribute to all who have died for America. The John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts is the hub of Washington's cultural life. This unique building beside the Potomac River is also the only monument to President John F. Kennedy. Inside, a massive bronze of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 7 feet high, is the focal point of the Grand Foyer. The Grand Foyer is itself huge. At 630 feet in length, it is long enough to contain the Washington Monument with 75 feet to spare. Its size is further accentuated by mirrors donated by Belgium, shimmering Swedish chandeliers, and the tall windows that look west over the Potomac. Off of the Grand Foyer, the Hall of Nations displays the flag of every nation officially recognized by the United States. A parallel Hall of States contains the flag of every state in the Union. In addition to its many monuments and memorials, the mall is also home to the world's greatest museum, the Smithsonian Institution. Its headquarters, the 19th century red sandstone building often referred to as the Castle, contains the remains of James Smithson, the English gentleman scientist who bequeathed the original donation for its founding. He envisioned an establishment for the increase and diffusion of knowledge in the United States, even though he had never seen the country. Today, the intent of his bequest has been fulfilled beyond anything he could have dreamed of. The Smithsonian has a collection so extensive that only a tiny percentage of it is on display. The institution now consists of 14 museums and various research facilities around the world. A number of Smithsonian museums are located on the Mall. The American Museum of History has exhibits ranging from the formal gowns of presidential first ladies to Archie Bunker's chair. The National Museum of Natural History houses a vast collection of exhibits reflecting the diversity of the world's wildlife and human cultures. The Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden houses one of the world's great collections of modern art in a donut-shaped building. Two other museums, the National Gallery of Art and the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, are probably Washington's best-known and most popular museums. The National Gallery of Art, also on the Mall, now consists of two adjacent buildings, the older West Building and the more modern East Building. Like the Jefferson Memorial, the West Building was designed by John Russell Pope. It was completed in 1941 and has a neoclassical exterior. Its main entrance leads into the Pantheon-like rotunda. Beyond, down spacious corridors illuminated by skylights, is one of the world's exceptional collections of European and American paintings. It contains Ginevra da Vinci, the only painting by Leonardo da Vinci in the United States. The single surviving set of portraits of the first 5 presidents by Gilbert Stuart, and paintings by great European artists such as Rembrandt, Rubens, Renoir, Monet, and Cézanne. The East Building was designed by the prolific Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei and opened in 1978. Its design is nothing if not stunning. The building is divided into 2 interlocking triangles, creating often dramatic lines and angles. Its pink Tennessee marble closely matches that of the earlier West Building. Inside, the interior is vast, open, and multi-leveled. The interior is dominated by this work, Alexander Calder's last major mobile, which he called simply Untitled. Other artists represented in the East Building include Picasso, Kandinsky, and Jackson Pollock. The most popular of the Smithsonian's Mall museums is the Air and Space Museum, which opened July 1st, 1976. It was an immediate success and is now the most visited museum in the world. This is not surprising, considering its unique collection, which is completely devoted to chronicling humankind's endeavors in the air and in space. The collection is staggeringly thorough and wide-ranging. It includes some legendary aircraft, such as the plane flown by the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. Nearby is the Spirit of St. Louis, flown by Charles Lindbergh in the first solo flight across the Atlantic. One story has it that the great Lindbergh stopped by after the plane had been donated to the Smithsonian to pick up something that he'd left in the cockpit. Appropriately enough, the museum also offers a tribute to Amelia Earhart, the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. This Lockheed Vega carried her on her record-breaking flight. The sometimes blurred distinction between aircraft and spacecraft is represented at Air and Space by the first plane to pass out of the Earth's atmosphere, the X-15. Historical spacecraft in the museum include the Mercury spacecraft Friendship 7, in which John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth in 1962. Gemini 4, from which an American first walked in space, and Columbia. the Apollo 11 command module that returned the first men to land on the moon. A Washington landmark of unique importance is the National Archives. Another designed by John Russell Pope, it was completed in 1935. The archives contain such documents as the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the U.S. Constitution, which are on permanent display. Washington's most famous residence is, of course, the White House. First called the Presidential Palace, then the Executive Mansion, and now officially the White House, this building has been home to every president except George Washington. The White House has undergone many changes in its history. When John Adams moved in on November 1st, 1800, not one room was, in fact, completed. Less than 15 years later, the British burned the building, but a sudden thunderstorm saved the shell of sandstone walls. They were painted white to hide the charring, leading to the name the White House, which became its official label in 1900 at the urging of Theodore Roosevelt. Gas lighting was installed in 1848, the first elevator in 1882, and electricity in 1890. The Oval Office was built in 1909. In the late 1940s, 3 years were spent during the Truman administration drastically rebuilding much of the structure as it was judged to be unsafe. A major redecoration project was undertaken by Jackie Kennedy, who led a successful campaign to recover the furnishings and possessions of the previous presidents, most of which were scattered around the world. The White House is now very much a museum in its own right. A few blocks down Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House, the U.S. Capitol is located on a hill Pierre L'Enfant called a pedestal waiting for a monument. George Washington laid the cornerstone for the Capitol on September 18, 1793. But the House and Senate did not move in and call the first joint session of Congress to order until 1800. At that time, the Capitol was a two-story structure. Like the White House, it was burned by the British in 1814, only to be substantially saved by a freak thunderstorm. In 1863, a milestone in the Capitol's construction was passed when it was crowned by the 19.5-foot Statue of Freedom. The cast-iron dome of the Capitol weighs 9 million pounds. It was completed in 1865, replacing an earlier wooden dome sheathed in copper, which was judged to be unsafe and poorly designed. Construction of the new dome was almost halted by the Civil War, which created a voracious demand for metals, but President Lincoln resolved that the construction had to go forward as a symbol that our nation will go on. The focal point of the Capitol is encased in the dome, the Rotunda. It measures an expansive 97 feet in diameter and is 180 feet tall. Eight large paintings line the walls of the Rotunda. The four best known are by John Trumbull, an aide to the then General Washington, who painted these historic scenes from America's early history. They are unique in that Trumbull painted from memory. As an aide to Washington, he was present at each of the events depicted. Just south of the Rotunda is Statuary Hall, which was for many years home of the House of Representatives. In 1864, each state was asked to contribute statues of its two most noted citizens. Many of those are now displayed here in the hall, although others are scattered throughout the Capitol. The Supreme Court, the nation's highest court, is located just across the street from the Capitol. The Supreme Court began hearing cases in 1790, but had so little prestige that its first Chief Justice, John Jay, resigned to become governor of New York. Since then, its importance has increased dramatically. This edifice has been home to the court since 1935. The neoclassic building was designed by Cass Gilbert. He may have been a little more lighthearted about his work than one would guess from the imposing appearance, for many believe that he and some of his acquaintances appear in the robed figures in the main pediment. This figure is in fact believed to be Gilbert. Next to the Supreme Court is one of Washington's finest buildings, the Thomas Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress, and it's little wonder. When it was completed in 1897, it was one of the most ornate public buildings in the United States. The Italian Renaissance architecture is rich in exquisite details, like these in the Great Hall. The main reading room, with its mahogany desks, stained glass windows, statues of great thinkers, and a 160 feet tall dome, is a striking interior space. Yet, as impressive as this architectural richness is, it is but a small reflection of the true wealth of the Library of Congress, its vast holdings. For the Library of Congress is the largest in the world, and its holdings are almost impossible to imagine. They include tens of millions of books on hundreds of miles of shelves, the papers of many presidents, the world's largest collections of maps, law books, and comic books, and this wonder, one of 3 remaining flawless Gutenberg Bibles produced around 1455. The holdings and these exquisite architectural details obscure the library's earliest days, which were humble indeed. It was begun in 1800 with a $5,000 grant from Congress and was housed in the United States Capitol. This modest facility was burned by the British in 1814, along with much of the Capitol, in retaliation for our burning of a similar library in Canada. The library went into an uncertain state of limbo until Thomas Jefferson sold his collection to the library. Since then, the library has grown solidly to become the institution that it is today. The diversity of the Library of Congress is matched by the diversity of the city it calls home. For Washington is a city of varied sites, each reflecting its own bit of our nation's history, ambition, and hopes. From the towering grandeur of the Washington Monument to the cutting sorrow of the Vietnam Memorial, Washington's monuments stand as symbols of all that has made this country what it is. In less than 200 years, George Washington's federal city has indeed become the grand capital of a great nation.